Police pounded on my cabin door, demanding I leave the home my father built. HOA called them, claiming I was a trespasser. Biggest mistake they ever made. This land was never in their HOA. That was how my first week back at the lake began. Not with peace, not with quiet, but with red and blue lights flickering across my porch like a carnival no one asked for. The pounding on the door rattled the old hinges, each thud shaking the cabin walls. I dragged myself from bed, heart slamming as I peeked through the curtain. 2 squad cars angled across my gravel drive, headlights washing over the pines. Their engines idled low and steady, like guard dogs waiting to be unleashed. And there she was, Rebecca Carter, the HOA president, arms crossed behind them, lips twisted into a satisfied smile. She looked like a queen who had finally cornered her pawn. "Police! Step outside!" a deputy shouted. His flashlight beam cut through the dark and pinned me like a spotlight. I opened the door, barefoot on the porch boards that groaned under my weight, and the first thing I heard was, "Sir, you're unlawfully occupying this property. You've been reported by the Homeowners Association." I laughed, short, sharp, more out of disbelief than humor. Reported? This land's been in my family since the 70s. My father built this cabin with his own hands. You're telling me I'm trespassing on my own home? Rebecca stepped closer, folder in hand, waving it like a badge of authority. The lakefront falls under HOA jurisdiction. He's in violation of community regulations. We've already issued notices. The deputies looked from me to her, uncertain. I could see the doubt in their eyes, because everything about this place, the weathered timbers, the handmade dock, the old steel anchor ring bolted decades ago, screamed history, not HOA uniformity. I leaned on the porch rail, picked up yesterday's mail, and held out an envelope. "See this? County utilities, address clear as day, not in your HOA, never has been." The older deputy adjusted his stance, reading carefully. Rebecca's jaw tightened. She jabbed her finger toward the lake. "Community water access supersedes private claims. He's endangering shared resources. He has no right here." That's when I lifted my phone, tapped the camera on, and let the red light glow between us. "If you're going to call cops on me in my own house," I said evenly, "then we're going to get this on record." The deputies exchanged looks. One cleared his throat. "We'll verify jurisdiction with the county before we take further action." And just like that, the balance shifted. Rebecca's smile cracked. The cruisers backed down my drive, their lights fading into the night, but she didn't leave. She stood there in the gravel, eyes locked on me, silent, and in that silence, her message was clear. This wasn't over, and I knew she meant it. After the deputies left and Rebecca finally retreated across the gravel, silence returned to the cabin. Only the crickets carried on as if nothing had happened. I stood on the porch for a long while, staring out at the lake, the same water my father had cast his fishing lines into every morning of his life. It felt surreal. I'd only been back here for a week. I had expected quiet mornings with coffee, the smell of pine, and the sound of loons across the cove. Instead, I was already battling a homeowners association I didn't even belong to. Truth be told, coming back here had felt like stepping into a memory. The cabin was small by modern standards. 1 story, rough-hewn logs, hand-cut beams, darkened by decades of smoke and sun. My father built it with the help of a couple of old friends back in the 1970s, long before the Heron Creek Estates HOA sprouted across the lake. The place sat maybe 50 feet from the water line, porch facing the cove where Dad's old aluminum rowboat used to be tied up. I could still picture him every morning, flannel shirt, coffee in hand, stepping onto the dock before sunrise, rod and tackle box ready. To me, this cabin wasn't just wood and nails. It was history, memory, legacy. I hadn't lived here full-time in years. Work kept me in the city, where life moved fast and loud. When Dad passed, I inherited the place, but it took me 6 months to make the move back. Maybe I wasn't ready before. Maybe I was afraid the silence would make me miss him too much. But when I finally pulled up in my old truck, boxes in the bed and the key heavy in my pocket, something inside me loosened. I was home. The first thing I noticed was Dad's old toolbox, still right where he'd left it, sitting on the porch steps like it had been waiting for me. Rusty but solid, the kind of thing built to last generations. Inside, I found wrenches, property markers, even a heavy set of bolt cutters that smelled faintly of oil and age. Just touching those tools, I felt closer to him. And the smell of pine sap mixed with lake moisture, hit me like a wave of nostalgia. That scent had never changed. It was the same smell that clung to my clothes when I was 10 years old, helping Dad hammer boards into the dock. The same smell that followed me when I came back from college for summers at the lake. The cabin itself had aged gracefully. Weathered boards creaked under my boots, but they were still sturdy. The anchor ring bolted into the dock edge was streaked with rust, probably untouched since the 60s. But when I pulled against it with both hands, it held firm as bedrock. It was a piece of permanence in a world that had changed too much, too fast. That first morning back, before Rebecca ever marched across my grass with her clipboard, I'd sat on the porch with my coffee and listened. The lake was glassy, reflecting the first pink hints of dawn. A light breeze stirred the chimes on the opposite shore, the HOA's side of the lake. The hollow metallic sound carried across the water, unfamiliar and intrusive, but I brushed it off. I didn't know then how much those wind chimes would come to symbolize what was brewing across the cove. Moving back here wasn't just about nostalgia, it was about grounding myself. The city had worn me thin, chewed up my patience, left me drained. Out here, I thought I could find some peace. A place where I could breathe again, where Dad's spirit lingered in every tree and stone. But standing there on the porch that night after the police left, watching the moonlight ripple across the lake, I realized peace wasn't going to come easy. Rebecca Carter had her eyes on this cabin. She had her own version of history, one where my family's land was just another square on her HOA chessboard. I wasn't sure yet how far she was willing to push, but I did know one thing. My father taught me to stand my ground. He believed boundaries mattered, not just on land, but in life. Respect them, honor them, but never let anyone take them from you. I looked at that old anchor ring again, the one sunk deep into the dock my father built. It had weathered storms, floods, decades of change. If it could hold fast through all that, then so could I. I wasn't going anywhere. It was my second morning back at the lake when I first met her face to face. I was wiping down the porch railing, breathing in that sweet pine-scented air, when I heard the crunch of footsteps coming fast through the grass. Not the easy stride of a neighbor dropping by to say hello. No, these were sharp, deliberate steps. Someone on a mission. "Excuse me!" A voice cut through the morning like a buzz saw. I turned and saw her, Rebecca Carter. Early 40s, blonde hair pulled back so tight it looked like it hurt, and wearing what I could only describe as an aggressive jogging outfit. Clipboard in one hand, violation notice in the other. She marched like a soldier storming enemy lines. "You need to get off my land immediately," she snapped, planting herself at the bottom of my steps. I blinked, caught off guard. "Your land? Ma'am, I think you're mistaken. This is my family's cabin. Been here for over 40 years. I gestured toward the structure behind me, weathered timbers glowing in the soft morning light, every board radiating history. Rebecca shook her head like I'd just spoken a foreign language. No. All lakefront property within community sightlines falls under HOA jurisdiction for aesthetic compliance. That includes this structure. She said structure like she was describing something foul she'd found under her shoe. I stared at her, half expecting her to crack a smile, admit it was some sort of weird joke, but her expression didn't waver. She thrust the paper toward me, a 75 violation notice, bold red letters across the top. "Failure to comply will result in further penalties," she said matter-of-factly, like she was issuing a parking ticket. I couldn't help but laugh, not the polite kind, but the genuine, disbelieving chuckle that slips out when reality tilts sideways. "You're fining me on land that doesn't belong to you? Lady, my address isn't even within your HOA. I reached over to the porch railing, where yesterday's mail was still sitting, and pulled out the utility company's welcome letter. I pointed to the line that clearly stated my address and jurisdiction. "See this? Outside HOA boundaries." Plain as day, Rebecca barely glanced at it before waving her clipboard dismissively. "Administrative oversight. We're working with the county to correct those boundary issues." The confidence in her voice was startling. She said it like she believed it, or at least wanted me to. Behind her, across the cove, the wind chime buoy clanked hollow and metallic. It carried on the breeze like background music to the absurd theater happening on my porch. I glanced at it, bright against the HOA dock, where a giant no trespassing sign hung. The irony was rich, her community guarding their shoreline while she claimed mine as shared access. So, let me get this straight, I said slowly, locking eyes with her. You're telling me the land in front of my father's cabin belongs to your HOA, and you're fining me $75 for it? Rebecca's cheeks flushed, and she jabbed her finger toward the lake. Community water access rights supersede individual property claims. We maintain these standards for everyone's benefit. I almost lost it. You're claiming you own the water now? She straightened her shoulders, clipboard like a shield. The HOA has environmental oversight responsibilities that extend to all waterfront properties affecting community aesthetics. There it was, policy created in real time, stitched together out of thin air, delivered with absolute conviction. That was the moment I pulled out my phone and started recording. The morning sun caught her face, every ounce of arrogance lit clear for the camera. Say that again, I said evenly. You're telling me my dock, my shoreline, my water, all fall under your HOA's authority? Rebecca didn't flinch. In fact, she doubled down, speaking even louder as if volume alone could make her words true. I caught it all on video. When she finally turned to leave, she shot me a look that made my stomach tighten. It wasn't just annoyance, it was a promise. The kind of promise that said, "You've made the wrong enemy." And as her footsteps crunched back toward the manicured lawns of Heron Creek Estates, I had no doubt she meant it. 3 days after Rebecca handed me that ridiculous violation notice, I woke to the sound of metal clanking against wood. Not the usual creak of my dock or the quiet lap of water. No, this was harsher, sharper, the kind of sound you only hear when someone's out there where they don't belong. I pulled on my boots and stepped outside. The sun was just rising, pink light spilling over the treetops. And there they were, 3 men in reflective vests, kneeling at the edge of my dock, bolting a long black barrier into place. A silt curtain, the kind used in construction projects, stretched halfway across the cove. The other end was fastened directly to the old steel anchor ring my father had set into the dock decades ago. "Hey!" I shouted, storming down the steps. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" One of the workers barely looked up. "HOA order, environmental safety installation." My stomach twisted. "On my dock?" "That's private property. Get it off. Now!" The man shrugged like it wasn't his problem and tightened the bolts. I felt heat rise in my chest. That anchor ring wasn't just a hunk of steel. It was history. Dad had said it himself, mixing the concrete by hand. I'd tied our rowboat to it as a kid, learned how to knot rope with it, spent whole summers fishing off that dock. And now the HOA was using it as their leverage point, literally chaining their nonsense to my family's legacy. Without another word, I turned on my heel, walked to the porch, and grabbed Dad's old bolt cutters from his toolbox. They were heavy, rusted, but sharp enough to do the job. I carried them back down, the workers eyeing me nervously. "This is your only warning," I said, gripping the handles tight. "You're trespassing. Get off my dock." They hesitated, exchanging looks. Then one of them muttered, "We better call Mrs. Carter." Before they could reach for their phones, I clamped the bolt cutters around the first steel line and snapped it clean in two. The sound echoed across the water like a gunshot. The barrier sagged instantly, black fabric slapping against the current. The workers stumbled back. And that's when I heard the familiar voice. "What do you think you're doing?" Rebecca was striding down the path, clipboard in hand, fury blazing in her eyes. I held up the bolt cutters. "Taking back what's mine. You're destroying essential environmental equipment," she spat. "This barrier was installed to protect community waters from your runoff." I barked a laugh. "Runoff? My cabin septic system was inspected less than a year ago. The county signed off. You know that as well as I do." Rebecca's tone shifted, her voice softening like honey. "Look, Ethan, we don't have to make this harder than it is. If you'll just agree to a compliance fee, say $200, we can consider this whole barrier situation resolved." I lowered the bolt cutters slowly, stunned. "You're trying to bribe me now?" Her smile didn't waver. "Think of it as cooperation, a small contribution to community upkeep." That was it, the line where irritation turned to outright anger. I snapped on the second steel line, the barrier collapsing into the lake with a splash. This dock is mine, that anchor ring is mine, and no amount of fake environmental excuses or backdoor deals is going to change that. Rebecca's face flushed crimson. She pointed at me like a prosecutor in a courtroom. You've just made a very big mistake. But I wasn't the only one listening. Two neighbors, Mr. Garcia and old Mrs. Henderson, had wandered down the shoreline to see what the commotion was about. They stood there watching, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. I could tell by their expressions that they weren't buying Rebecca's environmental story any more than I was. I lifted my phone, camera already rolling. Go ahead, Rebecca. Say it again for the record. Tell everyone this barrier was for the community, not your personal vendetta. For the first time, her voice faltered. The workers shuffled uncomfortably, unhooked what was left of the curtain, and carried it back up the path. Rebecca lingered just long enough to throw me one last dagger of a glare before storming off. As I stood there, bolt cutters still warm in my hands, I felt something shift. This wasn't just about violations or fines anymore. This was a battle for control, and Rebecca wasn't going to stop until she got what she wanted. But she had underestimated me, and for the first time since this whole mess began, I felt ready for a fight. The first night it happened, I thought maybe it was just coincidence. A neighbor's kid playing with one of those new hobby drones, maybe testing out the camera over the lake. But when the same buzzing returned the second night, low, persistent, like a mechanical hornet circling just outside my window, I knew it wasn't an accident. I stepped out onto the porch at 11 o'clock sharp. The air was cool, the kind of damp chill that settles after sunset by the water. At first I didn't see anything. The stars were out, faint but steady, and the moon floated low over the treetops. Then the sound came again, whirr, and there it was. A drone hovered 30 feet above the dock, its red navigation lights blinking in steady rhythm. It tilted, drifted closer to the cabin, then stopped, almost as if it were staring. Unbelievable, I muttered, pulling out my phone. I hit record and zoomed in. The drone spun slowly, its tiny camera lens catching the porch light. The red glow blinked across the window panes, making the cabin look like it was trapped in some kind of police standoff. Again. The next night, it wasn't just one drone, it was two. They hovered in formation, circling lazily over my roofline, dipping low enough that the hum rattled through the rafters. I didn't sleep much. Every time I started to drift off, the buzzing cut through the silence and jolted me awake. By the fourth night, the drones were joined by something new, floodlights, bright, industrial-strength beams mounted on the HOA's dock across the cove. They clicked on around midnight, shining directly into my windows like interrogation lamps. I tried curtains, I tried blankets, but the light cut through everything. It wasn't just brightness, it was targeted. They weren't lighting the lake, they weren't lighting their dock, they were lighting me. I stood there at 2 a.m., staring at the glow, washing over my living room, my blood pressure rising with every second. The message was clear. You don't belong here. We can make your nights unbearable until you leave. That's when I made a decision. If they wanted to play games in the dark, I'd bring them into the light. The next day, I rigged up a live stream camera on the porch, an old laptop, a tripod, and a hotspot connection. Nothing fancy, but enough to broadcast to the world. I set it to record the shoreline, the dock, and the sky above. That night, right on schedule, the drones arrived. The buzzing filled the air. The lights flicked on across the water, stabbing through the trees and into my cabin. But this time, I wasn't pacing the floor in silence. I sat in a chair on the porch, coffee in hand, live stream chat rolling on my laptop screen. Dozens of viewers tuned in, curious neighbors and strangers alike. They watched as the drones dipped and circled, watched as the floodlights blasted my windows, watched as I calmly narrated every second. See that? I said into the microphone, pointing toward the lake. That's not a security system. That's harassment. They've spent thousands of dollars to shine lights on one cabin. Mine. The chat exploded with comments. Some people were outraged. Others shared stories of their own battles with HOAs. The community I thought I had been fighting alone suddenly didn't feel so small anymore. Around 3 a.m., one of the drones dipped too low and clipped a tree branch. The crack echoed through the night, followed by a splash as it plummeted into the water. I couldn't help it. I laughed out loud. The live stream audience laughed with me, little text bubbles popping up faster than I could read them. But even in that small victory, I knew what it meant. Rebecca wasn't just trying to find me anymore. She wasn't just putting up barriers. She was escalating. She was making this personal. And if she thought a few sleepless nights and some fancy lights would scare me off, she was dead wrong. Because the more she pushed, the more determined I became to push back. It didn't take long for the neighbors to notice. By the second week of the drones and lights, folks from up and down the shoreline started stopping me at the grocery store, at the gas station, even on the trail by the lake. They'd ask, "Ethan, what's going on over there at night? We see the glow all the way from our porches." That Sunday morning, it all came to a head. I was sweeping pine needles off my porch when Rebecca showed up again. This time, not alone. She brought 2 HOA board members with her, both carrying clipboards like foot soldiers backing up their commander. Their expressions were stiff, rehearsed, the kind you wear when you've been told exactly what story to stick to. Rebecca didn't even say hello. She launched right in. "You've been interfering with community security equipment. The drones and lights are part of our environmental monitoring system. Your refusal to comply is a violation." I folded my arms. "Monitoring system? Those lights aren't pointed at the water, Rebecca. They're pointed straight into my bedroom window." One of the board members scribbled something on his clipboard without even looking up, like my words were just background noise. But then a voice called out from across the dirt road. "She's right, you know. Those lights don't shine anywhere but at his place." It was Mrs. Henderson. 80 years old if she was a day, walking stick in one hand, her little terrier tugging at the leash. She planted herself at the edge of my driveway, looking straight at the board members with a glare that could freeze a river. "I haven't slept a full night in weeks," she said, her voice trembling but strong. "Those lights spill right across the lake and into my guest room. It's like trying to sleep under a street lamp." Rebecca's smile faltered, but she pressed on. "That's an unfortunate side effect, but the community voted." "Don't you twist your words," another voice interrupted. Mr. Garcia, my neighbor 2 doors down, stepped forward with his arms crossed. "There was no vote. You put those things up without asking anyone." A murmur spread through the small group of onlookers who had gathered. People walking dogs, riding bikes, curious about the commotion, faces I'd seen 100 times but never paid much attention to until now, and almost all of them looked skeptical. I pulled out my phone and held it up, camera recording. "So, let me get this straight. The HOA claims these lights and drones are for environmental monitoring, yet my neighbors here are saying they were never consulted. And the only person defending them is you, Rebecca." She turned red, her jaw tightening as she realized the tide was shifting. She opened her mouth, closed it again, then snapped, "This isn't the place for a debate." I smiled thinly. "Looks like the debate found you." The board members shuffled their feet, clearly uncomfortable under the weight of so many eyes. Even the scribbler lowered his clipboard and glanced nervously at the gathering crowd. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, Rebecca didn't look like the woman in charge. She looked cornered. She spun on her heel, muttering something about a formal hearing, and marched back toward her SUV. The 2 board members hurried after her. Heads ducked. Mrs. Henderson shook her head, her walking stick tapping against the gravel. "That woman thinks she owns the whole lake," she said. "But she doesn't own me, and she sure as hell doesn't own you." The little crowd nodded, and just like that, I wasn't alone anymore. A few days after the confrontation with Rebecca and the board, I heard the crunch of gravel under heavy boots. This time, though, it wasn't her. It was a man I recognized the second he stepped into view, Hank Roberts. Hank had been my father's best friend, a fixture of my childhood summers at the lake. I remembered his booming laugh, his big hands steadying the boat as I climbed in for fishing trips, the smell of pipe tobacco that always clung to his flannel shirts. To me, he was practically family. "Ethan," he said, tipping his faded ball cap, his eyes soft but wary. "Mind if I sit?" "Porch is always open," I said, though my guard was up. He lowered himself onto the steps with a grunt, staring out at the water like he'd done 1,000 times before with Dad. For a moment, it almost felt like old times, until he spoke. "Son, you're making things harder than they need to be." I turned my head, narrowing my eyes. "Harder for who, me or them?" He sighed, running a hand over his weathered face. "Rebecca's not going to let this go. She's got the board behind her, and more pull with the county than you think. Sometimes it's easier to just Bend a little, pay the fine, keep the peace. My jaw tightened. Hearing Hank, my father's best friend, repeat Rebecca's talking points felt like a punch in the gut. You know this cabin isn't part of their HOA, I said. You helped Dad pour the foundation, for God's sake. You know where the boundary lines are? Hank nodded slowly. I know, I do. But boundaries don't always matter when people with power start redrawing maps. The HOA's grown, Ethan. They've got lawyers, budgets, influence, a single man. Well, you're swimming upstream. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded document, sliding it across the porch boards. I picked it up and saw a photocopied map with the county seal. At first glance, it looked official, but the more I studied it, the more things didn't line up. The date was smudged, the signatures too clean, almost as if they'd been traced. Where'd you get this? I asked. Hank avoided my eyes. Rebecca shared it at the last board meeting, says it proves your cabin falls within expanded jurisdiction. Thought you should see it before it becomes formal. I felt heat rising in my chest, not just anger, but disappointment. Hank was supposed to be on my side. He was supposed to remember my father, the summers, the dock we built. Instead, he was handing me counterfeit paperwork like it was gospel truth. Do you even hear yourself? I snapped. You're parroting Rebecca's lies. Dad would never have stood for this, and you know it. For the first time, Hank's composure cracked. His shoulders slumped, and for just a second, guilt flickered across his face. Ethan, he said quietly, I'm trying to protect you. She'll drag you through courts, through fines, through every dirty trick she's got. I don't want to see you broken down by it. I stood, folding the paper sharply and tucking it under my arm. I'd rather be broken than bought. And if Dad were here, he'd tell you the same. Hank looked at me for a long time, then pushed himself up from the steps. His eyes were sad, but there was something else there too, fear. I hope you know what you're doing, he muttered before turning away. I watched him walk down the drive, his shoulders stooped, the weight of divided loyalties hanging heavy. And in that moment, I realized Rebecca's reach wasn't just about property lines or paperwork. She was trying to cut me off from my father's legacy piece by piece, neighbors, friends, even the people I thought I could trust. But if she thought that would make me fold, she didn't know me at all. After Hank's visit, doubt gnawed at me like rust eating through steel. If Rebecca could sway my father's oldest friend with forged maps and smooth talk, how long before others started believing her version of events too? That night, I sat at my kitchen table with Dad's old toolbox and my laptop open. I wasn't going to fight this battle on hearsay or emotion alone. If Rebecca wanted to play the environmental protection card, then fine. I'd beat her with facts. The next morning, a package arrived on my porch, a professional water quality testing kit. Not the cheap strips you buy at the hardware store, but the kind consultants use. Multiple vials, reagents, pH strips, bacterial swabs, even chemical markers for runoff. It had cost me more than I cared to admit, but truth was worth every penny. I spent hours collecting samples from 6 points around my dock and shoreline, documenting everything with photos, timestamps, and GPS coordinates. The sun was high and the lake calm, a mirror of glass broken only by the occasional leap of a fish. Dad would have approved of my meticulousness. He always said, "Don't just be right, son. Prove you're right." By Thursday morning, the results came back. I sat staring at the numbers, rereading them 3-4 times to be sure. The water around my cabin wasn't polluted. It was cleaner than the lake average. Lower bacterial levels, stable pH, no chemical red flags. In fact, the worst readings came from the HOA's own access points downstream. Their runoff, their landscaping fertilizers, that's what was harming the lake, not my cabin. I laughed out loud, the sound bouncing off the cabin walls. For the first time in weeks, I had something concrete, undeniable. Proof that Rebecca's environmental concerns were not just exaggerated, they were fabricated. Later that afternoon, a knock rattled my door. I opened it to find Rebecca herself, clipboard in hand, but her demeanor was different. Less aggression, more calculated sincerity. "Ethan," she said, stepping onto the porch uninvited, "I think we need to have a serious talk." I let her in, curious to see what cards she thought she still held. She set a stack of papers on my table, and spread them out like a winning poker hand. Charts, graphs, bacterial counts, all painted a grim picture of contamination around my property. "These are our water quality results," she said, her tone grave. "The septic system on your land is outdated. It's a danger to the lake." I leaned over, pretending to study the charts, but my stomach tightened. Something was off. The numbers looked too neat, the columns too uniform. I flipped one page and froze. The date stamp matched the same day I had collected my own samples, yet her results were completely different. Then I saw it. A data table copied and pasted, the same sequence of decimals repeated in two separate categories. Sloppy forgery. "Interesting," I said slowly, sliding my own folder across the table. "Because here are my results. Independent kit, documented, photographed, time-stamped, and they tell a very different story." Her eyes flicked over the pages, just for a split second. She recovered quickly, forcing a sympathetic smile. "Tests can vary depending on conditions. Perhaps you sampled at the wrong depth." I shook my head. "Or perhaps you copied half your numbers from an old file. Want to explain why your bacterial count table is identical, down to the third decimal, to a chart in the county's 2017 report?" Her jaw tightened. She hadn't expected me to catch that. "Look, Ethan," she said, softening her voice, "I'm not your enemy. We both want to protect this lake. Why don't we work together? Upgrade your septic, add some erosion control, maybe a rain garden. I know the right contractors. It'll cost, but the community might even chip in." I almost laughed. A minute ago she was damning me as a polluter. Now she was offering help, like a wolf offering to guard the sheep. But I noticed something as she gathered her papers. A small leather-bound notebook slipped from her folder, its cover marked with the words, Phase 2. Inside, as I glimpsed when she snatched it back, were mock-ups of more forged charts, signatures that looked doctored, and a list of target properties with notes scribbled beside each. Rebecca wasn't just after me. She was running a campaign of expansion, using fake science and fake authority to swallow up more land and more control. She smiled, thanked me for my time, and walked out as if nothing had happened. But I sat frozen in my chair, my fists clenched around the test results. Now I knew. This wasn't just about my cabin. It was about the future of the entire lake community. And if she thought I'd roll over, she'd just made the biggest mistake yet. By Saturday morning, I'd had enough of being cornered. Rebecca had her board, her fake documents, her endless confidence. But I had something she didn't expect. Proof, a camera, and neighbors who were starting to whisper doubts. I spent half the morning turning my living room into a makeshift broadcast studio. Old desk lamp for lighting, my laptop camera rigged high on a stack of books, Dad's property surveys spread across the table like relics of war. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for the truth. When I went live that afternoon, I didn't know if anyone would tune in, but within minutes, comments started popping up. "Watching from the South Cove. Finally, someone speaking up. Been waiting for this." I took a breath and began. "Folks, my name's Ethan Walker. Many of you know my father built this cabin 40 years ago. What you may not know is that the HOA has been trying to claim my property, even calling the police to force me out. Tonight, I'm showing you the facts. Surveys, test results, and proof of what's really happening at this lake." I held up the utility letter confirming my address outside HOA jurisdiction, the county maps Dad had preserved, and the water test results proving my shoreline was cleaner than theirs. "This isn't about protecting the environment," I said firmly. "It's about control." The comments lit up. "She tried to find me for painting my dock. Same here, said my mailbox color was a hazard. Glad someone's finally standing up." Then, something remarkable happened. An elderly woman, Mrs. Callahan, uploaded scans of meeting minutes and financial reports she'd been saving. Her notes showed the 16 projects Rebecca had launched without community votes, all under the guise of emergency action. Next came a retired engineer, Mr. Daniels. He shared a folder full of photos, proving the new security lights were aimed directly at my cabin, not the lakefront in general. "I designed lighting systems for 30 years, his typed comment read. "This setup is harassment, plain and simple, no safety function at all." By noon, 8 neighbors were active on the call, each with their own evidence. A woman from the far side of the lake held up a violation notice identical to mine. Rebecca had fined her for the color of her dock, even though she wasn't in the HOA either. And then, the bombshell. A current board member, nervous but determined, joined the chat. Half of us don't even know about these projects until Rebecca presents them as already approved, he admitted. She calls emergency meetings, bypasses votes, and spends thousands from the community budget on her own authority. The comments exploded. She's stealing our money. Thought it was just me she was pushing around. This has to stop. As I watched, the realization hit me. I wasn't alone anymore. What Rebecca had tried to frame as me versus the community was becoming the opposite. The more light we shined, the more people saw the pattern. Neighbors, I said into the mic, this isn't just about me. It's about how our community is governed. Do we want one person inventing authority, or do we want democracy, transparency, and respect for each other's property? Mrs. Callahan suggested organizing a community live stream meeting where everyone could participate, not just board members. The idea took off instantly. People volunteered to reach out to their contacts, share links, and invite others. Within 24 hours, we had 43 confirmed attendees, including several board members who'd clearly been waiting for someone to break Rebecca's spell. For the first time since moving back, I felt momentum on my side. But then Monday morning came, and my phone buzzed with a call from the very board member who'd spoken out. Ethan, his voice was tight with worry. Rebecca called an emergency board meeting for tonight. She's framing your live stream as an attack on environmental protection. She wants expanded enforcement authority to handle so-called agitators like you. My gut twisted. She was already countering, spinning transparency into sabotage. And worse, he added quietly, she's putting my board position up for review. Says I've compromised loyalty by supporting you. I sat back in my chair, the weight of it all pressing down. Rebecca wasn't just defending her lies. She was escalating, purging opposition, doubling down with every move. But I looked at the chat history from our live stream, the scans, the photos, the stories pouring in from every corner of the lake. I saw people who had been afraid to speak now finding their voices. For once, Rebecca wasn't the only one with an audience. And that meant the fight was just getting started. Tuesday evening, the community center was standing room only. More people had shown up than I'd seen in that building in years. Families, retirees, even teenagers sitting on the floor with their phones out, recording everything. The air buzzed with anticipation, like the first rumble before a storm. Rebecca entered flanked by 5 people in business suits carrying briefcases. They set up at the front table like they were preparing for a courtroom trial instead of a community meeting. She was smiling, confident, radiating authority. Thank you all for coming, she began, her voice strong and clear. Tonight, we must discuss urgent environmental and safety concerns affecting our entire lake. Some of you may have heard misleading claims. My goal is to set the record straight. The board chair outlined the format. First I would present, then Rebecca, followed by open discussion. Fair, transparent, democratic. Exactly what Rebecca hated. When my turn came, I walked to the front, carrying Dad's surveys and my folder of test results. My hands shook at first, but the faces in the crowd steadied me. This cabin, I said, pointing to a map projected on the screen, has been in my family for over 40 years. It was never, and I mean never, part of the HOA. I laid out the utility company's letter, confirming my address outside jurisdiction, the county property records, and photographs of boundary markers Dad himself had set. I showed the video of Rebecca claiming she owned the water in front of my dock. A ripple of laughter broke the tension in the room. Then I unveiled the water test results, cleaner around my cabin than the HOA's own access points. Gasps, murmurs, people whispering to each other. This isn't about protecting the lake, I said firmly. It's about control, and it's time we face that. When Rebecca rose to speak, she was masterful. She projected aerial photos of the lake, charts showing declining water quality, statistics about invasive species. She painted a picture of crisis, of stewardship, of collective responsibility. Community stewardship requires community authority, she declared. Individual property rights cannot supersede the common good. Sometimes difficult decisions must be made. Heads nodded in the crowd. She was good, too good. For a moment, I worried my facts wouldn't hold against her theater. Then she pulled out what she clearly thought was her trump card, a crisp, official-looking document stamped with federal seals. This, she announced, holding it high, is a federal environmental emergency declaration granting the HOA temporary oversight of all lakefront properties pending restoration efforts. This is not my opinion. This is federal authority. The room gasped. People leaned forward. A low murmur rippled through the audience. Even I felt a jolt of panic. If it was real, it meant the fight was over. Federal trumps everything. But something about it nagged at me. The formatting, the too clean signatures, the way Rebecca held it just far enough away to avoid close inspection. Before I could lose my nerve, I pulled out my phone. "Let's verify that right now," I said into the microphone, dialing the county environmental office on speaker. The room fell silent, every ear straining to catch the tinny hold music, the operator transferring my call. Finally, a county official came on the line. I read out the reference number from Rebecca's document. There was a pause. Then the official's voice, clear and firm. "There is no federal environmental emergency declaration for your lake. None. We have no record of such a filing." The room erupted. Gasps, angry whispers, people shaking their heads. I looked at Rebecca. Her face drained of color, then flushed crimson. "There must be a clerical delay," she stammered. "Administrative procedures can be—" "Rebecca," one of the board members cut her off, standing. His voice carried across the hall. "Did you create that document yourself?" Silence. Rebecca's eyes darted, searching for escape. "It was provided through provisional channels," she hedged, but nobody was buying it anymore. One by one, neighbors began standing, telling their stories. Fines for mailbox colors, false safety violations, harassment lights aimed at children's bedrooms. Every voice added weight to the avalanche. Mrs. Callahan's shaky voice rang out. "She fined me for painting my dock, said it was a navigation hazard. Now I know. It was all lies." The board chair banged the gavel, trying to restore order. "Enough. This meeting has made one thing clear. Rebecca Walsh has lost the trust of this community." Rebecca gathered her papers, her legal entourage suddenly less confident, their briefcases snapping shut in defeat. As she walked out, her eyes met mine for a fleeting second. Not shame, not regret, calculation. Even in defeat she was plotting, but, for that night, the truth had won, and the people knew it. Thursday night came faster than I expected. The board had called an emergency session, and word spread like wildfire. By the time I arrived at the community center, the parking lot overflowed. Folks leaned against cars, clutching thermoses of coffee, waiting for the doors to open like it was a town trial. Inside, the mood was different from Tuesday. Then there had been tension and doubt. Tonight, there was determination. People weren't here to listen anymore. They were here for judgment. Rebecca sat alone at the front table. No legal team, no entourage, just her and a thick folder she kept thumbing through like a gambler with one last bad hand. Her smile was gone. The board chair cleared his throat. "We've convened this meeting to address serious allegations of misconduct, financial mismanagement, and the presentation of falsified documents. The floor will also be open for county officials who've joined us tonight." Right on cue, 3 county representatives entered, flashing badges and laying heavy files on the table. The crowd murmured. It felt like the cavalry had finally arrived. The first official, a tall man in a gray suit, spoke plainly. "We've received credible reports of falsified federal documents and unauthorized tampering with safety equipment. We are here to present our preliminary findings." Rebecca tried to interrupt. Those documents were provisional, but he cut her off with the kind of authority even she couldn't bulldoze. "Ma'am, federal documents don't appear provisionally on your home printer. What you presented was fraudulent, and we intend to pursue penalties accordingly." The crowd broke into murmurs of agreement. The second official, from the county auditor's office, opened a thick folder of receipts. Over the past 2 years, Ms. Walsh authorized 17 projects without recorded votes or transparent approval. Nearly $35,000 in community funds were spent on lighting, barriers, and consultant fees. Several invoices are inconsistent, and some appear fabricated. Gasps rippled through the room. Mrs. Callahan, sitting near the front, clutched her notes and whispered, "I knew it." The third official stepped forward, Fire Marshal Dave Torres. His presence carried a weight no one could ignore. He dropped two official-looking citations on the table. "Mrs. Walsh," he said in a calm, steady voice, "you are being fined $500 for tampering with equipment designated as emergency use infrastructure, and $250 for presenting false documentation. Both will go on record. We expect full cooperation moving forward." Rebecca's hands shook as she shuffled her papers. "This is a misunderstanding," she muttered. "Everything I did was for safety, for the community." But no one was nodding anymore. Even her staunchest allies sat stiffly, avoiding her gaze. The board chair leaned forward. "Rebecca, this board cannot ignore the facts. Effective immediately, you are suspended from your role as HOA president pending full review." The words hung in the air, heavy as a verdict. Then, as if on cue, the room erupted in applause. Not the polite clapping of a meeting adjourned, but a roar of relief from people who had been held under her thumb too long. I sat back, watching neighbors I'd barely spoken to hug, whisper, and shake hands. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about them reclaiming their voice. Rebecca sat frozen, her face pale except for two angry spots of red on her cheeks. She gathered her folder, stuffing loose papers inside, and stood. "I'll be consulting with my attorney," she said stiffly. "This community will regret undermining my leadership." But no one followed her this time. She walked out alone, shoulders tight, her footsteps echoing down the hall. Once she was gone, the board chair turned back to the crowd. "We need to rebuild trust. From now on, all projects will require full community votes. A rotating environmental committee will replace unilateral oversight. Transparency will be our standard." A cheer rose up, and for once it didn't feel forced. Then something unexpected happened. Fire Marshal Torres turned to me. "Mr. Walker, I'd like to thank you. If not for your persistence, this might never have come to light. We'd like to invite your community to partner with the county on a legitimate water quality initiative, this time under proper oversight." The crowd clapped again, louder than before. My chest tightened. Not with anger this time, but with pride. For the first time in months, I felt my father's presence on that porch, his voice whispering, "Sometimes you've got to clear your own path, son." The meeting adjourned. People lingered to talk, to plan, to laugh. The fear that had gripped the community for so long seemed to lift like morning mist off the lake. As I stepped outside, the night was crisp and clear. Stars glimmered over the dark water, and for the first time, I believed peace might actually return to this place. But I also knew Rebecca Walsh wasn't done, not by a long shot. The weeks after Rebecca's suspension felt almost unreal. For the first time since moving back, mornings were quiet again. No police pounding at my door, no drones buzzing overhead, no floodlights cutting through my curtains, just the soft lap of water against the dock, the call of loons at dawn, the familiar creak of the cabin's wooden floors as I made my coffee. At first, I didn't know what to do with the silence. I'd been living in a constant state of defense, always waiting for the next confrontation. Now the stillness felt fragile, like a porcelain plate I didn't want to drop. But slowly, I began to reclaim the rhythm of life by the lake. I rebuilt the old garden bed Dad and I had once tended, planting tomatoes and peppers. I fixed the sagging dock planks, sanding them smooth the way he taught me. And every evening, I sat on the porch, watching the sunset turn the water gold, breathing in the peace I'd fought so hard to keep. The whole neighborhood seemed lighter, too. Neighbors who once kept their heads down now stopped to chat at the store or waved from their porches. There was laughter where tension had lived. The newly formed Environmental Committee held its first meeting in Mrs. Callahan's living room. This time, instead of one person dictating, everyone had a say. People signed up to test water quality, track invasive plants, and even monitor wildlife with trail cams. They weren't perfect scientists, but they were invested, and that mattered more than Rebecca's stage charts ever did. I shared my data, teaching others how to collect samples properly. It felt good, like I was honoring Dad, who always believed stewardship meant taking care of the land yourself, not handing power to someone chasing control. The county even partnered with us, providing grants for shoreline restoration. Volunteers planted native grasses, built rain gardens, and replaced harmful fertilizers. For once, the word community project wasn't a cover for manipulation. It was real, and it worked. Rebecca, of course, didn't disappear. Rumors floated. Meetings with lawyers, whispers about appeals, even sightings of her SUV cruising slowly past the lake at odd hours. But her grip was broken. Whenever she tried to stir things up online, people countered with facts. When she sent letters threatening legal action, the county responded with official warnings about her fraud investigation. Her influence dwindled like a candle burning down to the wick. And yet, a part of me stayed watchful. I'd learned the hard way that power-hungry people rarely give up completely. One afternoon, as I patched the dock railing, Hank Roberts showed up again. He looked older than I remembered. Maybe it was the guilt, maybe just the weight of watching a friend's legacy nearly erased. He shuffled his feet, hat in hand, and said, "Ethan, I owe you an apology. I let her words get in my head. I should have stood with you from the start." I studied him for a long moment. Anger still flickered in me, but I also saw the man who once steadied the boat for me when I was 10 years old. "You were wrong," I said simply, "but you came back. That counts for something." He nodded, relief softening his features. "Your dad would be proud. You fought harder than anyone I've ever known." We shook hands, and just like that, a bridge mended. Not perfect, but enough. That night, I pulled out Dad's old journal. The leather was cracked, the pages yellowed, filled with sketches of dock layouts, notes on water levels, and reflections about life by the lake. In one entry, written decades ago, I found a line that stopped me cold. "This land isn't just boards and nails. It's our anchor. If one day Ethan has to defend it, I hope he does with both courage and truth." I closed the journal, tears stinging my eyes. He'd known. Somehow, he'd known that this place would be tested, and he trusted me to carry the weight. And I had. Now, when I sit on the porch at night, I think about how close I came to losing it all. Not just the cabin, but the memories, the peace, the community itself. Rebecca thought she could weaponize fear, paperwork, and authority to bend everyone to her will. But she underestimated one thing. People will fight for what's theirs when pushed too far. I learned that truth isn't enough unless you're willing to shine a light on it. That neighbors are stronger together than divided. And that sometimes the loudest victory isn't the applause of a crowd, but the quiet of a lake at sunset, knowing you stood your ground. The HOA made their biggest mistake when they sent cops to my door, demanding I leave the home my father built. Because this land was never theirs, and it never will be.